You're so cute. Hey, everybody. This is Kevin Getch from the Give, Grow, and Be Grateful podcast and book, I guess, what we're writing. And for those of you that have been listening to the podcast, I really appreciate everyone listening and all the great feedback. And as you know, we haven't really had guests on before. And so we're switching things up a little bit, and we got a little bit of a new format. In fact, I'm going to be going into more topics and a number of other things as well as I'm recording the book and doing the individual sessions on each section of the book. And so today we have a very special guest, someone that is very special to me. And I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Jennifer Getch.
Hi.
So for those of you who don't know, Jenny and I have been partners in crime for going on 16 years now. And I'll kind of share a little bit about how we met, how we came to be. And Jenny will correct me as we go through and share her version of the story, my version of the story, and we'll kind of share a little bit of that. And then we'll get into talk about all things Jenny, because she is an amazing woman who's had a lot of awesome experiences, a lot of challenges that she's super open to share. And I think a lot of people could benefit from some of her experiences and wisdom on that side of things. So Jenny and I'll tell you the short version. That's always code for it's going to be a little longer than what you think short is. So I was on Match.com. This was in early 2005. And I was basically trying to cancel my account because I had gone on a few dates on there, and it just, there's nice people and everything. It just wasn't for me. I hadn't met the right person on there. And so I had actually tried to cancel my account, but the way they set it up, they make it really hard for you to cancel your account, which in this case was a good thing, because a week later I was like, oh yeah, I have to go in and I have to cancel that account. So I logged back on. And for those who don't know, you can set a distance, right? So you can say people within 60 miles that, are interested and, all that kind of stuff. And I got this notice when I logged back in, it popped up and I saw Jenny's picture on there. And I remember snapping my fingers and pointing to her picture and going, now there's a woman I could see myself enjoying be with, just her smile and her energy. And she just, looked like a great person. And so I reached out to her, and to my surprise, she reached back out, and very quickly we were spending 4 hours, 5 hours a night on the phone for 3 weeks, just
racking up big phone bills.
Yeah, $600 phone bills later. That was back before you had the unlimited plans and all that. Back in the old days. We were kind of pioneers. There weren't as many people meeting online at that time, but everyone meets online these days. And so I guess we are one of the success stories around that. There's plenty of people who've met on there, but I would say, from my standpoint, all the thoughts I had in my mind of I was always I don't want to get married. I had all these things. If someone were to ask me advice, I would tell them to wait for a period of time, and everything went out the window. Within maybe 4 or 5 months, I was I want to call you my wife. I want to marry you. And I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, and it even sounds a little crazy to me, but it's just what I felt. And so from there, we have a long relationship, lots of ups, lots of downs, lots of challenging times, lots of positive times. And she has really grown into becoming not only amazing wife, but my best friend, and just someone who's impacted me in so many different ways. And so what are the important parts that I missed there, or what do you have to add on to that?
Well, I think one of the crazy things is just how much we went through, even the first year. It was we did all the big things, all the major things that can end up impacting a relationship.
Yeah.
And
having a child, getting married, moving in together.
building a house at first and then buying a house because that went awry, like all the craziness.
Living in a, was it 12 by 12 room for a month because the house didn't.
Oh yeah, and
wasn't,
between the two,
we rented out the one house and the other house wasn't done like it was supposed to be. So we moved in with Brent and Selena in a little 1-bedroom with a child and a teenager occasionally staying in the next room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. I think it was kind of a testament to just how kind of right we were for each other and how everything kind of played out the way that it did, made us stronger.
Yeah,
for sure. But you're right. We definitely have had some ups and downs through the 16 years. And I think communication was a huge thing for us and something that we have gotten a lot better at, still working on.
Always.
But gotten a lot better on. But yeah, just super strong and lift each other up and have each other's backs and the important things, right?
Yeah.
Love each other.
So there, you've gone through some huge life changes recently. And obviously we were celebrating those recently, but even with that celebration, there I don't know if it does justice for all the challenges that kind of came as part of the process you went through of building and growing a successful business. For those of you who don't know, Jenny founded Northwest Speech Therapy, had a successful speech therapy practice for a long time, and recently has chosen to retire from doing that in what in a lot of ways was probably the business was doing some of the best it's ever done, and to be able to make that decision, and like all the things that come with it, I think a lot of people don't really understand. So I know there's a lot to unpack there, but like if you could share with people like some of the challenges you were going through and like building the business and growing the business, and then some of the struggles you were having with deciding whether you should continue or not continue. And then when you made that decision, some of the identity changes and how you're working through those, have worked through those, and maybe still are working through some of those things. So
that was a lot.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, I mean, you definitely know how difficult of a decision that was for me and how long it took me to make it over the course of a few years, for sure. But essentially, I think what it came down to is the decision to prioritize my life and our family. I think was the biggest factors. Like some of the thoughts going through my mind on it, probably some of the reasons why it was the hardest to make a decision on were, in the beginning, were, making sure that the clients that we were seeing would have other options. And a few years ago, especially pre-COVID, that wasn't really an option. There just wasn't a lot in our area. And so, I mean, you know how my heart works. I'm, definitely have a big heart for the kids. And so it was kind of hard to think about that. So I just trudged along. Pretty good, I think. Yeah. I did a pretty good job. Stress and all, dealing with it. But luckily, with COVID came a bunch of new practitioners into our area, which made me feel a lot better about that aspect of it. Just knowing that the kids were going to kind of get taken care of and being able to be seen and get the therapy that they needed was a huge weight off my shoulders. And then, even you being able to come to a point where it seemed more comfortable in making that decision, was definitely helpful, um, as well.
For sure. I think what what I was saying for a long time was it seemed that you were putting a lot of stress on yourself and you were working sometimes all day late into the night and um, which I think was impacting your health and impacting your life in a number of different ways, that was not something that you wanted to continue. But I also know that, like, from an identity perspective, like, you probably, my guess is you have a lot of pride around your work ethic, and it had gotten you
Sure.
to a point where you were successful. And so it kind of came it's one of those things where it's like sometimes our strengths become a challenge at that point, because it's such a strength for us that we're pushing on that strength, and we're using that work ethic to get us to where we are, and it's like that. But then it's getting to a point where it's affecting your health. And so, like, how do you rectify, or how do you handle going through that and thinking about, I mean, this is a big question for a lot of people, I mean, for everyone, but like thinking about that identity shift and how that comes into play from putting so much work into it, and like doing that to shifting into a different identity, maybe different priorities, um, when that was such a like a strength for you to.
Yeah, well, I think one of the crazy things is I didn't even realize that my identity was wrapped up in that. I guess I just didn't think about it. I didn't realize or think about the fact that other people's identity of me was wrapped up in what I did, um, because it was just such a huge part of my life. So I think the first step was even recognizing that was the case, that was 100% my identity, even though as a mom and a wife and a friend and a daughter, like my the majority of my identity was wrapped up into this business. And so that definitely was one of the things that it's kind of funny because I was worried about that aspect. It was like, well, who am I without this? Like, this is what I've been doing for the last 15 years. So I actually expected that to have more of an impact on me. And I don't know if it's because I recognized that before I made the decision, but I literally expected to kind of go through an identity death in some ways, like having to shed that and then essentially figure out who I was again. I didn't have time for hobbies. And any of my spare time was spent, you know, with family. Um, I had even gotten to a point where I didn't have much time to foster friendships. So I definitely expected that to be a big aspect when I made the decision to retire, and also like once it was actually said and done. But I've actually been surprised at how easy that was. I don't know if it's always the case, but it definitely ended up being something that was kind of easy to realize that that wasn't the only thing that I could identify in. And I think one of the big things was going back to thinking about my values. And then also just being able to create space for myself and actually be able to get lost in my thoughts.
Yeah.
Like my brain was so busy all the time, like constantly with one thing or another that I had to do, or emails coming in, or fires that had to be put out, or whatever the case may be. My brain was always thinking about something work related or family related. And so actually being able to have some time and space to just sit with my own thoughts was like, it was crazy. It was really crazy. Um, and it wasn't hard to start realizing how many other aspects of myself there were, and like no understanding that there I had identity outside of work. But when I was in it, it felt like that's what it was. Especially people who knew me, right? Because it's the only thing that people would talk to me about. You know, was like work. How was work? How's work going? You know, what are you doing? What's going on? It was always work related, and again, my mind was always on that. So it was often. I mean, even for us, it was we got through a period or had a period in there where we had to be like, okay, date night, no work.
Yeah.
We're not talking about work. We're not talking about kids.
Yeah.
Because especially with both of us owning businesses, like it's always on your mind.
I think especially for everyone, but especially for the business owners out there, your it's why it can be such a hard thing, because you wrap your dreams, you wrap all this effort and work, and it becomes part of who you are to grow this business. And so for a lot of people, it is literally like you mourn that part of your identity.
Yeah.
I remember when I went through a period of time where I was in a really stressful situation, and I was considering, because of that stress, I was considering, because people were wanting to buy the agency I own. I was considering that and thinking like, what would I even do? And it was an interesting process to kind of go through that and think about that. And I think it's such a valuable thing for people to just become more aware of their own identity and how they define themselves, and that they are defining themselves in a lot of ways. But one of the things that you said that I think I want to point out to anyone who's listening, because I think it's so valuable, is Jenny was saying that having some of that time just for herself. And I think especially people who are driven sometimes feel guilty to
Oh,
take
100%.
time for themselves, especially not that men and women are 100% different, but I think for women especially, there's a lot of other things to worry about as well. Sometimes even more so than men, even in certain cases where they're like, oh, well, I'm worried about this business, but now am I being a bad mom? Because it's not that men don't think that too, but there's more pressure on women to be a great at everything. You have to be a perfect mother, and if you're running a business and all these other things, and so there's a lot of that pressure. And something I started saying, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago was, and I kept repeating to myself over and over, was slow down to speed up. And I didn't have the full context of what that meant at the time, but over time I started to define that better and get better at understanding that. And it's one of the things I think, especially for driven people, if you're not taking 15 minutes a day to just slow down and just be with yourself and not be so caught up in all these other things, and just give to yourself first. That's part of when the book Give, Grow, and Be Grateful is like Robert Kiyosaki, pay yourself first. This is like give to yourself first. Give yourself 15 minutes a day. And what happens is that compounds, that time compounds. And over time, you actually become better and you show up better in all those other situations for your spouse and for your friends and family and for people out there and just for yourself in general. And so, like, I think that's such a huge thing. And so I have certain ways of doing that, but um, I know you have a lot of different ways of kind of taking that time just to slow down and that. So you good with sharing like some of the different things like you do, just to take some time to yourself and slow down?
Well, the biggest thing that I've started doing that I really, really love is meditation. Um, huge, huge. I also do. I'll also like just stop and do like random yoga stretching. and stretching of my body on the floor. And for some reason, for me at least, it kind of puts me into a calm mood where I can just kind of lay and get lost in my thoughts. Um, the other things too, that I've been doing that we've talked about is um, shadow work.
Yeah.
I'm trying to dig in a little bit deeper and get to know myself better. Has been really helpful too.
That's one of the things that so Jenny brought this up to me and was like talking about shadow work, and I didn't know it by that name, that terminology. And so for the people who don't know what like shadow work is, can you share that with them?
Sure. So, I guess to talk about shadow work, you have to first understand what your shadow is. And although it probably seems self explanatory, just in case it's not, our shadow is essentially the deep, dark parts of ourselves, usually where all the thoughts about ourselves, of what we don't like about ourselves, what we don't want other people to know about us, tend to reside. And they also include like our limiting beliefs, past traumas that we've had, childhood traumas, just adult past traumas, can all kind of reside there. And essentially, it can make us very reactive in the way that we communicate, and live, and and triggered by people or situations. Um, and so the shadow work itself is a practice that helps bring those things into the light. And the idea about it is that if you can bring that into the light, you can acknowledge it and process through it and essentially accept it. Accept all those parts of you that you don't like about yourself. It helps you live a more authentic life, and it helps you not be as reactive when you're communicating with people, which I have found extremely helpful, even just in marriage.
Mm.
Um, and and they even say, like, if you are triggered by something, you have to investigate it. You have to figure out like why, what's going on, why, like what are the feelings that are bringing that up, um, insecurities, sometimes whatever it is. And I definitely think that it has made it easier to handle situations that I don't have control over, for sure. And I definitely say, like, I found a lot of benefits with it. I mean, I'm still doing it, and everybody should do it because everybody has shadows. Everybody has triggers, even if they don't want to admit it. Everybody has things that, about themselves that they probably don't feel like they can change, and they don't like. Um, and what I've realized is that has a huge impact on your self worth. And so I've noticed, even though I've always felt very independent and, um, just kind of positive and confident in my abilities, and I've always felt like I've had super strong self worth. And I've realized with this how much stronger it's gotten. And the ability to stand in my own power has been like just kind of eye opening because I thought I was doing that all along. So that's been kind of crazy. Yeah, I really liked it. It's been pretty cool.
Yeah, I think for I was doing the same thing, just I didn't call it shadow work. And for those that maybe saw the riverbed concept episode, this is like what we're talking about when we're talking about your thoughts, emotions, and actions, and how those flow over your core beliefs and your biology, and you understand that there's layers upon layers, and right, that are kind of some of the ones down there in the actual riverbed are really hard to get to. And so that's why a lot of times we're talking about shadow work is because it's in the shadow, it's in the dark, it's something that you don't surface as much, it's something you don't tend to show other people. And I think what's interesting is a lot of times we don't even know it ourselves. And that is it's a little bit of, it's kind of scary when you think about it. It's like, for most people, it's not scary because they, as soon as they hear that, they're like, yeah, that's not true. I don't believe that. And I would have been one of those people that said, like, and most people who knew me would say, like, oh yeah, his self worth isn't tied to that. Like, he's very confident, and you have that outside that you show to everyone, right? You have that mask that you show to everyone, and then you, even to yourself, you sometimes are looking at that, and you have that mask you show to yourself. But sometimes when we explore and we start to do that work, like Jenny just mentioned, is like you have those triggers, or you have those events where the emotions are running really fast and you, something's triggering you, and those are all signs telling you that there's probably something underneath the surface. And for my journey, and one of the biggest things was, and I think this happens for a lot of men especially, is that our self-worth is tied to our ability to be a good provider. um, because that's just part of what society says. As a man, you need to be a good provider. Not that women don't have that pressure too. It's just similar. For women, have a little more pressure in some areas. Men tend to have a little more pressure historically in the being a good provider um, area. And so for me, I didn't even realize that my self worth was tied up into that, and it was causing me so much stress. And I had built a business to a point to where I achieved all my goals and dreams, but yet I was more stressed. And it's because now I actually had something to lose. And that was triggering that, is everything that felt like a threat in any way of loss of that was actually a loss to my self worth. And I couldn't have connected that. It took a lot of work to really uncover that and go, okay, so this, and it was really one of those things where it's like almost like that Freudian slip, where it's just an idea that surfaces up, and you're like, okay, that idea just surfaced up, and where'd that come from? And so there's a lot of that kind of stuff that is really interesting to go into. But I think that journey of self awareness and just like knowing yourself better and understanding yourself better, that's, to me, it's been so freeing. So Jenny does meditation for her slow time. For me, I don't really call it meditation. I call it more like focused attention, though some of it would be considered meditation, some of it would be considered breath work, some of it would maybe be considered guided visualization or whatever it is. But I like to do a few different things. But um, for me, taking that time and focusing on some things that I'm grateful for, focusing on some things I want to see happen, sending out in my mind, sending out good vibes and hoping what I want to see happen for other people, and just really taking that time to be present and be with myself, and not be driven by all this other stimulus, allows me to be so much more effective. So the slow down to speed up was allowing myself to slow down so that I can show up better in all those other situations, which help you be more effective. So while it seems counterintuitive, it actually has, since I started doing that, I think our relationship has gotten so much better. My relationship with team members, our clients, our business growth, like friends, like everything has gotten a lot better because I learned to slow down, because I was always fast, fast, fast. And sometimes you miss things when you're going super fast like that. So
Yeah, being present, I think, is one of the really big keys.
yeah, that was a huge challenge for me. You've always, well, as I say, you've always been good at that, but I think there was a certain point where you started to be more focused on the business, that you, being present was a little more of a challenge because your mind was more occupied by many different things. But um, for me, like at some point, I trained myself to focus on the future and being present. Like I was in the future like 70% of the time, and that has its challenges when you're trying to have a conversation with someone and show them that you care and actually you're listening to them and you're not somewhere off in the future. from that standpoint. But what I was actually having a conversation earlier about, like, you have to spend time in the future to have that vision of where you want to go. But if you're not present in the moment, then you miss all the road signs on the way to that future, right? So the future never happens except in the present. So um, I'm curious. So with shifting away from the business, and you said it wasn't as challenging from identity standpoint. My The thought that comes into my mind when you say that is you probably had already, as you had been going through considering this for probably a couple of years almost and thinking about it, you'd probably address some of those over time. Is
Yeah,
that?
that's what I was saying. I had already started processing
Yeah.
some of that. And I think that's why it made it easier um, to actually kind of process through, is because I had thought about that, and I had kind of geared myself up for that, and it wasn't something that just hit me. I think sometimes when people retire, they quit where they are and they do something new in that in between period, they that doesn't even come to mind for them. That isn't even something that they think about in consideration of the choice that they're about to make. And literally that is how in depth I went in making a decision like I did, because it was such a huge one, and it was at a time where it was bringing in the most money, and that also was a big factor for me of like, am I being crazy, like giving this up, like, things are good, um but yeah, I think a lot of times people don't even think about that, so it really just hits them, and that's got to be hard, because even that first thought that I had about it was like took my breath away. I just wasn't sure, and I feel like in the beginning I actually made decisions to stay because of it. I mean, that's how strong that feeling was. So
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I also like, running a business and having a lot of employees, some of which are younger. I often think, because how I was when I was younger, I was very what in biology terms they call dopaminergic, which is uh, everything outside of your what is right in front of you. Is if you're heavily dopaminergic, you're very rarely focused on the things that are in front of you, and so like everything I wanted to do was out there somewhere, right? So I would go out there, I'd go over to where the grass was greener, and then I would be there and I wouldn't be happy there. And I would be like, come over here, right? And so I think there's an interesting balance where I think it's important to understand that it's not like it's kind of a duality where it's like your self-worth doesn't have to be tied up in the thing that you're doing, but how do I say this? But there's also ways to make the thing that you're doing more purposeful, right? So it's like the for myself, and like when I was trying to reconnect, because some people are going to be in different positions where they're like, hey, I'm in this position like where Jenny was, where she's like, I've made this, it's successful to this point, and she wanted to close that and retire. And there's going to be other people who want to continue and move forward or switch and do something else or whatever it is. And so um, I think sometimes it's important to understand the getting very clear on your identity and getting very clear about who you want to be on a day-to-day basis and how you want to show up is way more important than the doing and having aspects. If you think, for those who know, like be do have concept or something like that, like just for those who've achieved a lot of those things and have like, oh, have all this stuff, it's like they realize that having all the things isn't what's valuable to them. And doing some of the things, it was great, right? They did these things, that was great. But it was more about the person they became to do those things. And so the cool thing about that is you don't have to, like, what for me personally I put off a long time was like, I thought, well, once I have these things, I'll be happy. And while it was also scary, it was also kind of freeing to realize that there's tons of people out there with financial freedom that are not happy, that are miserable, that, have those things, because it's like, it's not dependent on that. This isn't happiness. Happiness is something that comes from within. It doesn't come from externally. And once you have that, then it can be like, it's so freeing and powerful from that standpoint. Um, so I wanted to touch on that, but I also wanted to come back to,
Hold on one second.
yeah.
I don't know if it's helpful, but I think that figuring out whether or not you're, especially like with your job or certain things, if you are finding identity in them, it can be hard to figure that out. And I heard this pastor say this thing, and it was really eye-opening to me. But essentially, he was saying that if you have an issue with losing it, then you had identity in it. So if there's something like, if you are, and I know this might seem crazy, but like if you're worried about losing your spouse, it's because your identity is wrapped up in that relationship. If you're worried about losing your job, it's because your identity is wrapped up in that job. And there's other factors to it too, right? You can, especially with work, like you might be worried about losing the money, or, whether or not going to be able to find another job. But in the end, if you are holding on so tight to it and afraid to lose it, you have to take a look at that and kind of figure that out, whether or not your identity is wrapped up in it. But like I said, for me, that was really helpful in kind of figuring out the different things that my identity was wrapped up in.
So it's funny because it's one of those things where I couldn't agree blanketly with that, but I think, and there's would be a lot of situations where, yeah, that 100% true. Like, I've thought about that, but there's a number of situations where I'd say no. And the one like distinction I think is important to make is that it's okay for you to have part of your identity be something that you enjoy doing, that you're good at, or whatever it is. What's not okay is to have your self-worth. So there's a difference between identity and self-worth. It's not okay to have your self-worth tied up in that other person, right? And or that job or whatever that thing is. It's not okay to have your self-worth should be unconditional, but your identity is, once you understand it, is whatever you choose it to be, and you can make that over time. And so if I enjoy doing martial arts, and if I wasn't able to do martial arts, if that would upset me, then that's okay. It also, like Jenny pointed out, it tells you like, yeah, that's part of your identity. Not that that's a necessarily a bad thing, but the self-worth, I would say, would be a bad thing. So I want to go back to shadow work for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, and we talked about this pretty in depth about how it's really hard. It's, like you think about the riverbed, and it's partially why that analogy works so well. It's like getting into the water, that's fluid, and getting into some of the areas that are in the depths and even dark and murky, you can get down there with a light, but getting into the actual riverbed takes a lot more work. And so um, for you, what has there been anything like a aha moment or a light bulb or anything like that has been like, okay, this has helped me kind of discover some of those subconscious limiting beliefs, the subconscious associations that you created, or anything like that were either changing for you, or any things that you just become aware of that allow so that somebody else could go, okay, I need to kind of keep my eye out for that, or I need to maybe do this occasionally to be able to uncover that, or any methods or techniques or anything like that?
Well, sure. So one of the big ones is your triggers. Yeah. Like I said, anything that you are getting triggered by, you have to investigate it. Um,
So when you say investigate it, like, tell me more about, like, I guess that's more of what I'm thinking for. When you say investigate it, what's that mean for?
so actually thinking through and processing it. So, what are you feeling? What's underneath that feeling? What limiting belief might be coming into play that's making you feel that way? What past trauma has happened that's making you feel that way? Like looking into those things, I think is one of the biggest thing is actually looking at your triggers. And one of the things that I have found, and I even talked to you about this, that I think is so crazy, is that at first, when we would be talking about something and either one of us would get triggered, it spirals.
Yeah.
The conversation is no longer a conversation. It spirals into an argument, essentially. Um, and so working on these things started making me be able to, in that, recognize it. And at first, I couldn't stop it from happening.
Mm-hmm.
But after it started, I could stop it. Right. And then the more I worked on it, I've gotten to a point where there are many things that I can stop before it even starts. And that's what I'm saying. That's one of the things that makes it easier to communicate with people. Um, because you're not going to be able to control situations, and you're going to have to talk to people who you don't want to talk to.
Yeah.
Maybe coworkers or someone who um, you just have to be around. And so it can be really helpful in those situations. um, the other thing too is I would get so frustrated when I would work on something, and then there'd be situations where I would recognize that I wasn't getting triggered by that, and I'd be like, oh, see, I'm doing the work, it's working, I'm good. And then all of a sudden something would hit, and I'm like, oh crap. I'm not quite over that one. And then you got to go back to drawing board and keep working. But I think one of the ways to know that you are doing it is that it's hard.
Yeah.
If it's not hard, you're not digging deep enough. And sometimes the reason why you can feel like you've done all that you need and you've accepted it and you're all good in that area, but then have it trigger you again, is that there might be another aspect to it that you haven't pulled out, that you haven't realized. And that's also one of the reasons why I was saying that it's just kind of a lifelong process. You're constantly going to be working on yourself. But the most important thing and the best time spent is putting work into yourself, is focusing attention onto yourself and helping you grow. So definitely worth it.
Yeah, it's 100%. To me, when like I feel like this is a superpower. Like when people learn to understand the meaning they're assigning to something, and to be able to basically downshift from being in the fast mode where they let that thing, which is kind of what you're talking about, you're able to downshift and go, okay, I'm I'm starting to take in this information and it's giving me this trigger. They can downshift into it and be like, okay, what is the meaning I'm assigning to this? And like you said, start going through that question. Why am I doing this? Is the meaning I'm assigning true? Do I know 100% that this is the case? Because a lot of times we're telling ourselves rehearsed stories. And sometimes as you dig deeper, it becomes that, oh, I have insecurities about this that are usually, there's fears and insecurities that are coming to the surface that are making you assign meaning to that thing, or at least to some extent. It could be many different things, obviously. But the acronym STEER that we'll do an episode on here very soon is stimulus, thought, emotion, action, and result. And so that's what I used because, as Jenny well knows, I used to have a problem with road rage. And it was something that I felt out of control. Like I literally felt out of control, and I would have this trigger of someone like cutting me off in traffic, and I would, I would then fall in that habit and pattern of what meaning I was assigning to myself, or what I was telling myself that this meant, was that they were trying to hurt myself and my family. Which, if you assign that meaning, you're going to react accordingly, right? So I had this thought about it, which drove an emotion of rage, and the action was to show them that that wasn't okay, which I was then putting myself and my family in danger by doing. And that was the result, was a lot of issues around that. And so for me, when I was able to start changing that to say, it's not about, like, it's not even about me. I have no idea what's going on in this person's life. It could be that they have a family member who is in the hospital and they're flying to get there and they didn't even see me. Like, there's that aspect of it. And the other thought is that tell myself is ask myself a question, because that guides the attention of how can I keep myself and my family safe? Right? So that guides the meaning I'm assigning to it, and the emotion and action, and ultimately the result. So that's anyways, to me, that's like literally, for a lot of people, I feel like superpower. I want to touch on one other thing, and I want to get your two. I guess there's two things here. One is, I think some people would get the natural reaction that, if you're changing the meaning of something, you're lying to yourself. So why, like, if you're changing the meaning, that means you're just coming up with something that's, that, like, you're kind of coming up with a different story and you're lying to yourself. And like, why would you do that, as opposed to, because they're so, because they believe that their current beliefs are the truth to some extent, right? That's what they've learned. And so how could I tell myself something different than the truth? And then the other one, so, and I can ask this later, is for the people who are like, well, you should experience your emotions, because they might feel like trying to address triggers is not feeling your emotions. You get what I'm saying? Like, some people might feel like, oh, you're suppressing your emotions by those triggers, as opposed to realizing that those triggers are suppressed emotions. Right? So I'll start with the first question. So the first question is for people who are like, well, like changing the meaning of something. If I believe the meaning, if you're telling me, this is what I hear someone saying right now, they're saying, you're telling me this thing over here, this box is white, and you're saying I can just say it's black, and that's going to change the meaning. Well, what's true, right? So, and this is a complex question, so like we can talk about it, but it's like,
are you relating that to shadow work though? Because I wasn't talking about changing your meaning, so I'm trying to figure out. Like,
so it is related to shadow work, in that once we start to understand our beliefs, these limiting beliefs that we have, what the meaning is. So meaning and belief being basically the same thing that we're assigning to that thing, is saying that in that case, my belief, the meaning I was assigning to this person, is that they are threatening myself and my family, right? That they're trying to hurt myself and my family in that case. And so, and there's some truth to that, in that they're cutting me off in a way that is dangerous, right?
Sure.
And so for someone who looks at that and goes, well, how could you tell yourself anything different? Because that's the truth, right? So they're very stuck in that, their mindset, right? Like, if I see this thing that's white, I can't tell myself it's black. Does that make sense? It's a tough question, but it's one I think is important for people to understand.
Sure. So, I feel like if you are actually doing the work on that particular issue, then you will get to the point where it's not a lie to you. You essentially would be changing your mindset about it, and in a way that you understand, because you went through the process and you got there because your understanding has improved. So I don't know if I mean, maybe at the beginning you would have a feeling of like that, that you are potentially lying to yourself by not kind of following through with the belief that you have in that moment. But yeah, actually doing the work, I think that you would get
100%.
to a point where it wouldn't be a feeling of lying to yourself, because whatever that realization you got to is essentially your new truth. And but the thing is that it's not right or wrong. It's not that you're right or wrong. It's not that the person who triggered you is right or wrong. It's essentially just making you realize that there is something in that that is unhealed. um and so that's why I was saying, like, it can, you're saying fears and insecurities, and you're right. Those things can definitely come into play. Limiting beliefs go right along with that. But another really big one is traumas, and it may not be that the person who just triggered you is the person who traumatized you, but they essentially kind of fill that role in that instance. They're doing something that is pulling you back to whatever happened to you, and that's ends up making you feel very triggered when you're unhealed. If you've gone through the work and you've healed that, then you can interact with people who still probably remind you of those situations or those insecurities or fears, or do something that reminds you of that, but you're not triggered by it because that part of you is healed. Um, it's actually, I mean, again, you don't tend to like to get too hokey, but um, doing shadow work is the ultimate goal of it, besides to heal all the wounds that we have, is to allow you to become your higher self.
100%.
Kind of that path to enlightenment in a lot of ways. um and so, yeah, like I said, I feel like if they've done the work, then they wouldn't feel like it was lying to themselves. But at the beginning, they may be very stuck in that, and that may actually keep them from doing the work because they don't think that they're wrong.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking, is like, you in the beginning, you're stuck in that belief because it's something that's so strong, and it triggers you for a reason, and you have a very strong belief around that. And it's usually not until some other pain has made it a big enough issue that you're now willing to do the work on doing that. But if you start to detach from some of that stuff and you start to just examine them without as much judgment, um, the questions, one of the ways I look at it is questions guide our attention. And you can ask a series of questions to kind of go through and uncover, um, a lot of these things, and really understand to some extent, is this belief true? Is this 100% of the time? There's no way possible. You have all the evidence and 100% that this is true. And chances are probably not, right? And then it's as you go through that kind of questioning process of saying, well, like, what do you feel like? What do you become like when you believe that thought? And you start to understand that and what that's triggering. It becomes more of a what is beneficial than a what what holding on to that thing you believe so much, and is this beneficial for me, for the people I love, for the community? And you can kind of take it to the farther circles, as far as like thinking about, does this meaning create beneficial, assigning this meaning to it, is that creating beneficial experience for myself and for others around? Because I think, but the way you explain is perfect. I think once you go through the work, yeah, now you really understand and have actually taken time to think through and mindfully choose the beliefs that are beneficial in a way that's supports you and who you want to be every day. So I think that's huge.
Yeah.
So then the emotion side, for because I do think sometimes people, we say things in a certain way not meaning a thing, but our the way our brains work, we naturally look for what's not there or what's not correct. And so I could see someone saying, well, if you're going through this, like, you should be like you shouldn't be not experiencing your emotions, right? That you should feel your emotions and experience those, and it's not bad to have emotions, right? It's just information, and you're having those emotions, and so all that kind of stuff. And so I think the sometimes when we talk about um, guiding those in a more I think holistic way, where we're actually thinking about like and choosing the way we want to be, the emotions, the way we want to experience life. To some people, that feels almost it feels almost false to them, because they're like, well, I'm not being true to myself. And so it's like a really deep kind of question, because really it starts with, well, I just should be experiencing my emotions. And this goes back to a lot of people who think that they don't have control over their emotions. And to some extent, they're right. They don't, but they can. And there's that spectrum of having control over your emotions to some extent. And to what extent does it make sense to, I guess, control your emotions in a way that aligns with like who you want to be, or to those people that would be like, you should just feel all your emotions and not like,
So
is that what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm saying it in the right
yeah,
way,
let me
but
let
yeah.
me let me ask you some questions, see if I can make sure I understand. So, in saying that people feel like they should feel their emotions, are you talking about when you do get triggered that people are just feeling like, well, that's an emotion that I need to feel in that moment because I'm feeling mad about
Yeah.
something that happened?
Yeah. That's exactly one of the ways. Yeah.
Okay. And whether or not that, and so people will feel like they need to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they'll think that some people think that what they would be like, well, that's healthy because you're getting triggered and you need to experience that emotion. But if it's
Sure.
like repetitive and it's so that's kind of where more so what I'm.
So I would say that yeah, of course, it's important for you to feel your emotions, but in when you're triggered, when you're in that state, like communication, it's going to break down. It's not a healthy situation for positive communication. So that's not a good time to be in it and feel it, right? So and we've done this to where if that's the case, we say, you know what, like let's take a break. um, we'll come back to this. Um, and then what you can do is you can go by yourself and you can feel those emotions. You can do the shadow work because that's essentially what it is. You're discovering what emotion am I feeling? What's underlying it? And you're sitting in it and you're feeling it. And I even told you one of the things that I didn't realize I was doing before was I was intellectualizing all my feelings. I thought I was amazing at feeling my feelings because I could tell you all about them. I knew why they were happening, everything, right? But it wasn't until recently that I realized that that's actually intellectualizing your feelings, not actually feeling them. So, you do have to kind of be in it and recognize where it is in your body. What are you feeling? Is it a tightness? Is it anxiety? Does your stomach feel upset? Like what is it that you're feeling? And then work through the steps to figure out why essentially you're feeling that. So like what is the underlying either fear, insecurity, limiting belief, or trauma that is causing you to feel that way in that situation. And if you're able to do that, then hopefully you're able to go back into that conversation and actually have a conversation. Because I don't think we're alone in the fact that when we get triggered, it escalates the situation. And at the end, neither one of us feel like we've gotten any resolution. I don't think we're alone in that. I think that's kind of what happens when things do get escalated. And if you're in your emotions, things are going to get escalated.
So, and for some of those people out there, I think it's helpful to have like the context of when we talk about getting triggered, you're literally your sympathetic nervous system and basically getting an amygdala hijack where you start. It's a fight or flight response, and sometimes you're getting cortisol, you're getting adrenaline pumping through your body, and it's a survival instinct in your body. So it's actually not healthy for you either, like to go through that, especially to do it a lot over time. That actually lowers your immune system. It negatively affects your body and how you're feeling, and it affects how you show up for other people, right, and for yourself ultimately. And so I would say 100% everything you said, and I think I would just say from my standpoint, the way I look at it is, while I am want to be true to myself, and I want to experience and process through my emotions, I also know that the emotions are the signal, right, telling me like a little bit about what's going on and what I'm feeling, and really what I'm feeling is from the beliefs and the meaning I'm assigning to it. And so it's really kind of giving me insights into that riverbed of why have I assigned this meaning to it, and like you said, doing that work to understand and uncover, is that a beneficial meaning? Is that actually the way I think about myself? I There's so many things that it sounds weird, but like I had things I would say just randomly about my body that for the longest time I didn't realize were basically negative associations. They were a lot of little things like, oh, I have a slow metabolism, or I would talk about a lot of different things, and a lot of those things were just uncovering. It was basically just realizing that I wasn't actually grateful for the body I had. I was actually resenting the body I had. And when you're resenting something, it tends to wither and die. And when you're grateful for something, you tend to cultivate it and grow. And so it's really important to kind of understand the meaning you're assigning and those beliefs and where that path ultimately leads. And so that you're being intentional with it. And so 100% feel your feelings, but also explore those feelings and realize, why are those feelings there? What is the underlying riverbed that is guiding those emotions of the meaning and belief that you have around those things? Um, we could keep talking about this, and I actually really love that. We should do this more often, just so that you and I get to talk really deep talks more often. But
You mean actually on video, because we do that.
I know we do, but like, we get into this, but I thought this was a good way of doing it. So we'll kind of put a nice bow on things for someone who's younger right now that is, going through life and experiencing life. Like, I'll say kind of teenage to early 20s years, where they're going through a lot of things. They're going through a lot of development, and they're coming through, and they're trying to find their footing in life. Um, like what kind of advice would you give to them? And it doesn't have to be career advice. It could be personal. It could be life advice, just in general. Like, what kind of advice? And I didn't prep you. I don't think I prepped you for this question, but so just off the cuff, um, what kind of advice would you give to the youngins out there?
The youngins,
The
that age group. I actually think very specifically for that age group would probably be that they need to learn to love themselves, especially in like this day and age. Social media is brutal. Yeah, I think loving themselves, and just that idea of that you benefit 100% from the work that you put into yourself. So, and the investment that you make in that as well, would hopefully be, beneficial to them. Just love themselves.
All right. Thank you so much, baby. Love you.
You're welcome. Love you. Bye, guys.